was younger, my siblings and I used to dress up. We were Superman and Superwoman. So there's my brother, my sister, and me, and we wore a cape and we felt powerful. We felt noticed. We like to feel powerful and we like to feel noticed, don't we? Are you still wearing capes these days? Of course, you don't stop wearing a cape just because you're not dressing up for like Halloween or something like that. There are different things in this world that are capes for us. They are the things that make us feel powerful, that make us feel noticed. What is that for you? What's your cape? What makes you feel important? In the Bible, God talks about us in really wonderful ways. Talks about us in ways that probably make us feel powerful and maybe even make us feel noticed. In the Bible, in Psalm chapter 139, it says, "Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous." I just imagine the author sitting there being like, "I'm amazing. Like, wow, my hands, God, you did such an amazing job. Lord, my eyebrows, thank you. Wow, amazing, nice, kudos to you." And it's nice, right? It's good to have that kind of confidence. So I want you to hear this. God thinks you're awesome. Sometimes we have a hard time believing that. Maybe it's because of the things that are surrounding us. Did you know that you are surrounded by 432 negative statements per day compared to 35 positive statements per day? 80% of first graders score high on a self-esteem test. 20% in fifth grade score high on that same self-esteem test. And 5% of high schoolers score high. Now, that doesn't mean that if you didn't score super high on that you're like incredibly dangerously low in self-esteem. But it just means that you don't score super high on it either. It's quite the drop from 80% to 5%, from first graders to high schoolers. What does that look like when we turn into adults? We start to feel poorly about ourselves through experiences in our life. And here's the interesting thing that I find, that just because we think less of ourselves over time, doesn't mean that we're thinking of ourselves less often. In fact, it can feel like the worse we feel about ourselves, the more we think about ourselves. Think about it like this. Have you ever had a pimple on your face? I can tell you right now, I noticed it this morning. I've got a pimple on my chin right now. I thought about this talk before that happened, and I wake up and I'm like, Lord, you must have wanted me to give this illustration because I've got a pimple on my chin right now. But of course, when you notice something wrong about yourself, you can't take your eyes off of it, can you? So you get your mirror, right? And you start to examine yourself. And you start to think about ways that you could cover yourself up. And so then you go from wearing a cape, you turn it around, and instead it just becomes a blanket. You're trying to cover yourself. You're trying to protect yourself from the world seeing who we really are. We get in this protection mode because we want to give the image that we're powerful, but deep down, we know there are flaws. Think about it this way. There's a reason why teams are nicknamed lions and tigers and bears. Nobody nicknames their team sheep or lambs. When you go to a carnival, the kids get their face painted as lions, tigers, and bears. But babies who have no say in what they get painted as, well, the parents paint them as little lambs because the parents know how sweet and yet helpless they are. And sometimes when I look in my mirror and I notice my flaws, I realize I'm not a lion, a tiger, or a bear, but I feel much more like a sheep, helpless, not very powerful. And maybe I don't even want to be noticed anymore. I want to be unnoticed so people don't see those problems about me. In John chapter 10, Jesus says, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd sacrifices his life for the sheep." Jesus just referred to us as sheep. What does that mean? What does that mean about how he sees us? He doesn't refer to us as lions, but as sheep. Does that turn you off from God? Because God has access to the real you, right? Like God knows, hey, you're not always a lion. God has that access. I think Satan will often try to use the things on our surface to get to us, right? Like the things that are presentation. John chapter 10, verse 1, at the beginning of the same chapter where Jesus is talking about being a shepherd, Jesus says, "Anyone who sneaks over the wall of a sheepfold rather than going through the gate must surely be a thief and a robber." So here comes Satan, ready to attack you on your presentation. It's a cheap way to get in your soul. It's like noticing a pimple and then using that pimple to get into your soul. And suddenly it's not just the pimple that bothers you, it's the deep feeling of insecurity that you have when you're around other people. And all of a sudden you're not experiencing the world the way that you're supposed to. Instead, you're just looking at a mirror all day, missing out on the beautiful world around you. But then take a look at this. Just one verse later, John chapter 10, verse 2, Jesus says, "But the one who enters through the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The sheep recognize his voice and come to him. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out." Jesus does not mock you for your presentation that you try really hard to make perfect. Even though, in all honesty, sometimes it's a little funny, isn't it? He's familiar with the doorway to your soul. He doesn't force his way through a cheap entry. He created you. He knows how to reach you. And he does it like a good shepherd would. It's not to hurt you, but to save you. So here at Hope, every single Christmas we have essentially a full petting zoo's worth of sheep that come to Hope. And they're the shepherds that come along with. And we put them out there for our live manger scene. And so I've had a lot of conversations throughout my life with shepherds, which is kind of surprising. Like, I would have no other reason to talk to shepherds other than these Christmas Eve services. It's amazing how shepherds talk about sheep. It's amazing how shepherds talk to other shepherds about sheep. There was one shepherd who was telling a story about two shepherds who were driving down the highway. This one shepherd had just recently, maybe about a month or so before, sold some sheep. And as they're driving on the highway, they look off into a field. And that shepherd notices something about that flock. And he says to the shepherd next to him, he says, "Whoa, look at that flock over there. 4 of those sheep right there. Those were my lambs." Maybe if you're not a shepherd, you're sitting in that passenger seat and you say, "There's no way you could know that's your lamb." But the other shepherd who was sitting next to him listening to this just said, "Yeah, of course you would know that." Because shepherds so intimately know their sheep. They have to, because sheep are helpless. Sheep aren't lions and tigers and bears. You know, it's funny, when animals get out into a field, right, like there's typically 2 kinds of reactions. There's the one where the animal runs out like, "Freedom!" And then there's the other animal that runs out there and is just searching for home. But sheep just kind of stand there. They don't know where they are. They just kind of get lost. They need someone to know them intimately. I've heard from shepherds that shepherds will look their sheep in the eye. They'll get eye contact with their sheep. They care about these animals. They have to. If they don't, these sheep will get lost. So these shepherds, they know the sheep well. So well that they could look off on the highway and a giant flock of sheep say, "Those 4 are mine." God? Well, God knows you better than you know yourself. But here's the good thing. God also likes you better than you like yourself. It's intimidating to think that God knows us so well. Typically, people start to dislike us the more they get to know us. But God sees everything, and it only draws him closer to us. John chapter 10, verses 14 through 15. Hear this. Jesus continues in his story about shepherd and sheep. "I am the good shepherd. I know my own sheep, and they know me, just as my Father knows me, and I know the Father. So I sacrifice my life for the sheep." Sometimes we think we have to continuously go back to the mirror to fix ourselves. I got to cover up this pimple. If we don't pay attention to ourselves first, then no one else will, because they'll see the flaws and they'll find that they have nothing to look at. But if we're looking at ourselves so often, we're missing out on the world. You don't have to look in the mirror so often, because Jesus is looking at you. Jesus pays attention to you. God sees you. Ephesians chapter 1, verse 4. I can never get over this verse. It says, "Even before he made the world, God loved us and chose us in Christ to be holy and without fault in his eyes." You were seen in the eyes of God before he even thought about creating the universe. You are noticed. You are wonderfully and fearfully made. Not because you say it yourself. A lot of times in this world, we like to say, "Well, I'm going to write my own story. I'm going to tell myself who I am." You got to journal. Sometimes I like to journal. I like to write. It's not necessarily a narrative about my life, but it's certainly like a story of my life, right? Like it's my self-story. It tells me, like what I'm thinking, what I'm experiencing, what I'm feeling. And if someone were to read that, they would know what I'm thinking, experiencing, and feeling. But in that journal, it's interesting. I can tell myself that I'm writing those things, but really I'm actually just writing my perceptions of the world around me and the way that the world perceives me. If I ever think that I'm smart, I think that I'm smart because someone seemed impressed by something that I said. At the same time, if I ever think I'm dumb, I didn't tell myself that. It's simply because my experiences and the people around me told me that when I say something, people are going to laugh at me, and I feel stupid about it. I didn't teach myself that. I was taught that. Here's what God teaches you. Yes, sometimes you're helpless. Yes, sometimes you get lost, but that only drives him closer to you. That only makes him more in love with you. That only makes him want to die for you even more, want to sacrifice himself for you, want to give you life even more. And it's uncomfortable. Certainly it's uncomfortable. Have you ever seen a shepherd wrangle a sheep? It's kind of uncomfortable to watch, honestly. Like a sheep, like they see the master, they're like, the master's trying to bring the sheep back to safety, and the sheep's like, they're like running away, they don't know what to do, they don't want to be handled, and the shepherd sometimes, it seems like has to be rough with the sheep. Like I've got to pin the sheep to the ground and like carry it, and it seems rough, right? It seems rough. But the shepherd is only doing what is saving the sheep in that moment. And maybe sometimes it feels like the life that you're living in the world around you is so rough and it's uncomfortable. Do not doubt that God is still your good shepherd. And even when things feel uncomfortable, even when things hurt, God is there to take care of you as your good shepherd who sees you and knows you and loves you. I remember after one of those Christmas Eve services, I was watching a shepherd try to get the sheep back into the trailer. That sheep did not want to go. The shepherd lifted it up and kind of like wiggled it around and finally got it in the trailer. And as soon as the sheep got into the trailer, the sheep was almost like, oh yeah, cool. I'm home. I'm safe now. Sometimes life works like that. Sometimes we get to a place, we feel comfortable all of a sudden, we feel at peace, and we look back and we're like, wow, God really did have my back. But maybe on the other hand, you feel like you're kind of in the wrestling match right now. You feel like life is such a struggle. Do not lose hope on what God has for you. Do not get distracted. Don't miss out on this life, this wonderful life that God has given you. Take 1 minute to pause and say to God, I'm surrendering my cape to you. I'm surrendering, maybe it's become my blanket to you. You know me, you see me, and you love me through and through. You can put down the mirror. You can take off the cape. You can be all right with being a sheep because you have a good shepherd who knows you and sees you through and through. In Psalm chapter 23, it's beautiful. It's one of the most powerful passages and most famous passages in the entire Bible. Maybe you'll recognize it if I just read the first verse. Even if you didn't grow up in church, you might have heard this. The Lord is my shepherd, I have all I need. He lets me rest in green meadows. He leads me beside peaceful streams. He renews my strength. He guides me along right paths, bringing honor to his name. Even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid, for you are close beside me. Your rod and your staff protect and comfort me. You prepare a feast for me in the presence of my enemies. You honor me by anointing my head with oil. My cup overflows with blessings. Surely, your goodness and unfailing love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will live in the house of the Lord forever. Are you starting to notice something here? God comes as Jesus Christ to be our shepherd. And he is our shepherd so that he can eventually be our friend. Tells us he's guiding us, he's moving us. He notices us, he sees us. He's our shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd. He guides me along right paths. He's still my shepherd. Even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid. Your rod and staff, they comfort and protect me. He's still my shepherd. But then you prepare a feast for me. Now he's our friend. Jesus becomes your shepherd so he can become your friend. You are a sheep, but Jesus is turning you into a person who can put down mirrors, who can take off capes, and know that God knows you better than you know yourself, and he loves you better than you love yourself. It's true. He's your good shepherd. He's your friend. Take off the cape.